a major preoccupation of conservatives and centrists and even some right-wingers recently, meaning the last few years, has been free speech and free speech activism. And this is a response to an increasingly aggressive and suppressive left that seeks to shut down conservative and centrist and right-wing discourse, especially on college campuses or in the media, and also on social media, because all of these social media platforms are controlled by, shrieking, malignant, parasitic, rent-seeking, shrill, unpleasant, demanding, entitled social justice warriors. It's a shrieking mob of effeminate, censorious, nagging, scolding, hectoring harridans. And they either control or infect every major social network, and the companies that operate them, to the point where they can hold these companies and these platforms hostage and use their market dominance in those niches, because there's predominantly only one platform serving each niche in the social media market. Facebook for the long format, Twitter for the short format, Instagram for pictures, YouTube for videos, Snapchat for dick pics, etc. So there's one market leader in each niche, and that's where everybody wants to be, because that's where everybody else is. And so that appeal gives them a lot of power to abuse, and they abuse it partially by skewing the distribution of ideas and information towards their, preferred political bias. So it's a bundle. Their service is a bundle of goods and bads. In this case, the bads are, left-wing political bias and suppression of right-wing conservative traditional views. And the goods are the access to other people and the platform and the tools that they give you for communicating. So legacy media, social media, totally infected with hostile alien tribes, and also these mentally ill social justice warrior hordes. They censor free speech. They censor right-wing speech. They don't permit free speech, and they also do this in real life, particularly on college campuses, where they either take direct action to shut down conservative and centrist and right-wing events and speakers, or they pressure the institutions to shut them down. And so, understandably, a lot on the right and a lot of conservatives and a lot of centrists even have championed a return to free speech as the solution to this increasingly hostile climate. And, that's a bad idea, because free speech is what got us here. There are ways to hack free speech. The idea behind free speech was not retarded. It was not terrible. The idea was supposed to be that a marketplace of ideas would result in the best ideas and the truest ideas flourishing, and the false ones, dying out. That isn't exactly what happened, because there are a lot of ways to hack the marketplace of ideas. One is through simple repetition. If you can pump an idea out on multiple channels with enough volume and frequency, you can make better ideas harder and costlier to find. If you have to wade through a sea of bullshit to find the nuggets of truth, it's harder and costlier to find the nuggets of truth. And with all the people imbibing the bullshit that you have to contend with, it can be, let's say, socially costly to challenge them on that as well. So, simple repetition is one way of hacking free speech. And, it hasn't escaped notice that a large number of media companies and social media companies are owned by members of one particular tribe. And this probably has a number of factors, explaining it. One of them is that they simply want those positions of market dominance more than you do, because they understand their significance for controlling the flow of information and for serving, agendas much more so than you do or members of your ethnicity do. So they understand the significance of those positions, and so they want them a lot more than you do. They also understand the benefits of nepotism a lot more than you do. Now, a lot of white, even right-wing and conservative people frown on nepotism or ethnocentrism and consider meritocracy to be a superior ethos or principle. It's not. Meritocracy, every conception of meritocracy that I've heard of proposes a dangerously narrow conception of merit, which, for example, discounts the importance of kinship in brokering and mediating trust and altruism, which are generally higher in group. They're higher among kin. Kinship altruism is a normal thing. Non-kinship altruism is evolutionarily unstable and doesn't exist in nature. Hardly doesn't exist in nature outside of humans. But kinship altruism is the norm. The altruism of, a mother for her babies, for example, or, among close kin in general. Humans can generalize that kinship altruism to a wider network of distant kin. And Western humans in particular, because we developed homogeneous outbred nations, can generalize that kinship altruism to a very high degree. So far, in fact, that we actually overgeneralized it and made it universal to people who are not even kin at all, and now we're being taken advantage of by those nepotistic, non-kin outgroups. And, while that generalization of kinship altruism from the family to, let's say, the nation, supposing it was a homogeneous and outbred nation where people were actually related to each other, within a moderate number of degrees of kinship, that worked. But once you universalize it to where you're not even taking note of actual kinship at all, it's just a recipe to be taken advantage of. But what are the advantages of nepotism? Well, it's actually evolutionarily stable because it allows your genes to profit from both sides of a transaction, not just one. Under meritocracy, you have to go with the best deal anybody can offer you in terms of, lowest costs or most benefits. If you're nepotistic, you might accept a slightly better deal from a kin member. And that can be advantageous because if your genes are profiting from both sides of that deal, your genes may be reaping a higher total benefit than if you just pick the best deal and deal with non-kin. So it can be evolutionarily stable under those circumstances. It also affects trust. Trust and altruism are highest in group, meaning kinship trust, kinship altruism are going to be highest, and that makes the cost of transactions lower. So that's another advantage of nepotism. And, finally, meritocracy proposes that you have to give opportunities and status and wealth and power and influence to, outgroups who may be, let's say, implacable racial enemies. And so extending those benefits to others under meritocracy, if they're not going to reciprocate them to you, that's not a worthwhile proposition. And so for all of those reasons, nepotism can be a better strategy than meritocracy. And this one particular tribe that controls our flow of information, they're able to maintain control of those organs, those media and social media platforms in a large part, not totally, but in large part because of nepotistic practices. And they understand the benefits of those more than you do and your people do. And that's why they control those organs. So free speech can be hacked by simple repetition. That repetition can be secured by controlling the media organs and social media platforms that distribute the information and the ideas. And one group has done that, and you haven't. So that's one issue with free speech. There are other ways to hack free speech. One of them is pill-pull, which is a word that means to pepper. And it's a style of disputation involving, a lot of rhetorical smoke blowing and laying down a confusing web of fallacies, a labyrinthine argument, so to speak. Not a real argument, but a fallacious argument aimed at sustaining a conclusion. And basically the trick here is just to raise the cost of disagreement in terms of time, intelligence, etc., until the interlocutor relents. This is one way of winning an argument, a dispute, without making a valid argument. You can do this pill pull technique for any conclusion, and people frequently do. So pill pull is a common way of hacking free speech in order to elevate a bogus conclusion. And then you have also the feminine means of coercion, which is kind of like a social and emotional version of pill pull, where you nag and scold and gossip and rally, meaning you gather other people around to do the same or to oppose somebody, and psychoanalyze, and you use these social methods to raise the social and emotional cost of disagreement. And this is what women do. It's another way of hacking free speech, and advancing a bogus conclusion or a bogus line of reasoning. So there are all these different ways to hack free speech, and free speech is not a good system. It's led to what we have now, and so a return to free speech would only lead to a return to what we have now. So it's not really a solution, and I would submit to you that there's no good reason to tolerate certain kinds of speech, leftist speech, communist speech, anti-white speech, anti-Western speech. There's no good reason to tolerate any of these things. The idea behind free speech, a free speech purist would say that, well, you have to expose yourself to these ideas in order to understand how they're wrong and to refute them and to finally beat them. But we can see that through the use of these hacks, they can survive and even thrive and dominate in a free speech marketplace. And so maybe there is a rationale for allowing their discussion in an intellectual way so that people can learn how they're wrong and refute them, but there's no good reason for tolerating their broadcast for distribution and consumption. We know communism is wrong. We know cultural Marxism is wrong. We know multiculturalism is wrong. And there are all of these pernicious ideologies that we know are wrong, and so there's no reason to tolerate their agitation and their subversion and their mass distribution. And that's what we need to ultimately do, is to suppress the distribution of pernicious ideologies. And this gets into a tough question. People say, well, how can you determine what's true or not? Well, what's true, that's tricky, obviously. But what's not true is much less tricky, and that can be established for an absolute certainty. So once something is conclusively falsified or we've seen that its consequences and its costs are too high to bear. Like with communism, it's been tried dozens of times. It's never worked as advertised. So there's no reason to keep trying it or keep allowing it to be tried, or even to keep allowing it to be articulated. So once something is falsified, once we've established for an absolute certainty that it's false, there's no reason to allow it to continue to use these hacks to establish dominance in a free market of ideas. That's the only purpose that a free market of ideas serves any longer, is to allow these pernicious ideologies to establish dominance through these hacks of free speech. And so really, if you're advocating a return to free speech, what you're advocating is to allow pernicious and false ideologies to be able to assert their dominance through these hacks of the rules of argument and whatnot. And so there's really nothing left to suggest free speech as a valid principle or a good principle. It's been tried. We saw what happened, and we can move past this and establish a more sane and a more reasonable standard, which is that you have a right to true speech, not free speech, but true speech. And if you're going to use false and malicious and parasitic and insane ideologies, and you're going to use hacks to spread them without making valid arguments, then there's no reason to protect you. It's all cost and no benefit. Hey guys, if you like the channel, please like, share, subscribe, or support with the links below.